You know how to read and write in English. The problem is the SAT keeps sucker punching you with all these convoluted passages, rules you didn't know exist, and trick answers. So in this video, I'm going to give you some hacks to help you finish the English test on time and choose the correct answer with minimal effort. Now, if you were a total nincompoop, you could look at this question and match the verbs to the subject of the sentence, perhaps even erroneously choosing A because relics and ancient artifacts are plural. The main subject is actually a gerund, protecting, which is a singular activity. Or you could just use the odd verb out trick. Simply consider the words they and she can be substituted with he or it as well, and match them to your answers. They were, they have been, they are, she was. And yes, this trick has worked on every single subject verb agreement question since the test went digital. Just remember, if you can use she and they on any of the answers and they both work, then you're dealing with a verb tense question instead. And you can watch this video to learn about that. But what happens when you have 4 correct answers? Modifier questions can sometimes feel like that because when read aloud, every choice seems at least okay. You know you're dealing with one of these questions when there's a comma before the blank space and every single answer choice begins with a different grammatical subject. These might look scary, but they're actually really easy if you use the front flip hack. And to perform the front flip hack, all we have to do is take our answer choices and throw them onto the beginning of the sentence with the blank space. So for example, we would say, many critics were discussing the influence of social media platforms. That seems plausible, right? Critics can discuss stuff. The spread was discussing the influence. No, a spread can't discuss something. It's not a human. There was discussing. So anytime you see existential there, not going to be your answer for these. And then the attention was discussing the influence. Attention also can't discuss influence. So by process of elimination, the only one that works is choice A here. And then of course, for pronoun questions, you should know we just need to find the antecedent. But while you're doing that, make sure to use the sandwich skip hack. And when I talk about sandwiches, I'm talking about things like this. We have a dash and we have another dash, a little dash sandwich. If you see a comma sandwich, you could do the same thing. Go ahead and ignore it and then work backwards from the blank space to find your antecedent. What developed in different species over time? As it often does, this goes all the way back to the beginning of the sentence, and this light is the antecedent. This light developed in different species over time. So we're going to go with the singular it. And for our last hack, instead of ignoring words, we're actually going to add a couple of words, specifically the words of the. So here, for example, there are a couple different options that indicate musicians and brains are owning something or possessing something. All we have to do to check if we're unsure is use of the to see if it makes sense. So I say the beats of the musicians. That makes sense. We have ability, the ability of the brain. That also makes sense. So these should both be possessive. And we know that for these words, no apostrophe is going to mean no possession, so we can get rid of A and we can get rid of D, and we're left with a couple of options that have apostrophes. The only difference being, do we have plural musicians? That would be apostrophe after the S, or singular musician. Well, I know it's going to be plural because in context, participants are listening to multiple tracks. And even the singular Daft Punk is a band made up of multiple members. So it's going to be choice C. And on top of all these hacks, if you guys want free cheat sheets for every rule in the English section, go ahead and use the link in the description. No, they don't just act like periods. Here's your hack. If you see a semicolon not acting like a period in the text, it is also not going to act like a period in your answer, and your answer will include a semicolon. So here, for example, we see in the passage, there is a semicolon hanging out right here, And we have a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys right after. This is a dead giveaway that the semicolon is not acting like a period. So we know we're going to have a semicolon in our answer, get rid of C, get rid of D. And then just to quickly explain the rule, we have a complex list whenever we run into one of these situations. And in a complex list, the items are separated by semicolons. So to decide between A and B, I just need to figure out where does my item end. So we have this person experimented with molecular gastronomy, an uncommon technique at the time. Next item. So it's going to end here. It's going to be choice B. And I know I just told you that semicolons don't always act like periods, but 8 out of 10 times they do. In fact, they're pretty much twins. Evil twins. We don't like evil things, so you're going to go ahead and eliminate both answers if you see an answer that has a semicolon and a period. But, and this is a very big but, you can only do this if that is literally the only difference between the answer choices and if there's no complex list like from the first hack. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. If we look at our answers, we see that A and B are literally the same except for a period versus a semicolon. There's no extra words, there's no extra punctuation, so we're all good there. We just need to make sure that there's no complex list going on. And an easy way to check for that is just to look for semicolons. There are no semicolons in the passage, so we can get rid of A, we can get rid of B. And then as far as the actual answer goes, go ahead and pause the video if you want to try it on your own first. But we're going to need a colon because what we have is an independent clause leading up to, this team studied the migratory patterns of 2 species of sea turtles. And then we have a list, which the most common use of a colon is to introduce a list after an independent clause. So beautiful answer, perfect answer. But you need to be careful because this hack has been taught so much without the proper caveat. The caveat being you need to make sure that that's literally the only difference between them, and you need to make sure you don't have a complex list. So I get comments like this one here saying, whenever a semicolon and period show up, it's going to be neither, right? But that's not the case because we have a semicolon and we have a period, but however, the word and gets thrown in here. And as we just discussed, you can't have one of the fanboys with a semicolon unless it's a complex list, but there's no other semicolons here. So we would get rid of B for sure. And now A is an option, right? So now we just need to consider, do we have 2 independent clauses? The experiment failed to produce the expected results because the equipment had not been calibrated properly. Boom, that's a full independent clause. The research team had to postpone their analysis. That's an independent clause. It's going to be choice A because this is a comma splice and this is a complete run-on, right? And while periods and semicolons have each other to hang out with, the word however gets very lonely without punctuation after it, usually a comma. And let's make this real simple. I told you, the hack is, if there's no punctuation after however, eliminate it. So we eliminate B, C, and D, and our answer by default is choice A. Let's talk about the colon now. The colon is clingy. It needs a complete sentence before it or it completely falls apart. So looking at this one, if we're trying to determine if choice A is even an option, the very first thing we do is check for an independent clause. Disney's Frozen explores themes of. That's not an independent clause, so A is out. And a little hack for you, a dash can replace a colon, so C is also out. And then between B and D, we have Disney's Frozen explores themes of sisterhood, self-discovery, right? We're listing things, but again, just because you have a list doesn't mean that it's a colon. You need to have an independent clause before that list if you're going to use a colon. In this case, the preposition of is introducing the list on its own. It needs no punctuation. This is going to be choice B. Now, if we switch it up just a little bit, we have Disney's Frozen explores several themes, and that is an independent clause. So A is a contender, right? So if we start with an independent clause, we know that we're going to need to get rid of B because that's basically nothing. Ooh, and look, we have a semicolon and we have a period, and there's literally nothing other than the capital S. They're basically the same, right? They have a comma after sisterhood, so we can get rid of C and D because of that. And then by default, we know it's going to be choice A. For this final hack, I want you to be lazy and only read one sentence. The sentence, with the blank space in it. But you do have to read the whole sentence. The SAT loves to make the first part of the sentence work with one of the wrong answer choices. So be lazy, but not too lazy. And for this one, just, pause the video, try it on your own first. And I'm telling you, don't be too lazy. But what happens is we get into it and we have on November 8th, 1895, this person captured the first X-ray image, right? And if we look at choice C, we could say, having discovered the technology's potential almost by accident during experiments with cathode rays. Boom, that sounds wonderful, right? We've got a beautiful independent clause followed by a modifier. But if we read to the period, there's another independent clause. The physicist published his findings to great acclaim. And now all of a sudden, this is a comma splice. A comma splice being a comma trying to act like a period or semicolon. So choice C does not work. That's why we have to read all the way to the end. And reading all the way to the end, we realize, wow, we actually do have a full sentence that ends with the word image, right? This person captured the first X-ray image. And then we have this modifier, this participle phrase, having discovered this thing, comma, independent clause, the physicist published his findings to great acclaim. And that is exactly what we're looking for. Now for reading, my first hack is to predict before you peek. You want to analyze the passage, choose your own answer, and then eliminate answers that don't match your prediction. For example, and go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own first if you'd like. If I read this and started going through the answers, I might try to make them work, right? So choice A, general readers are likely to find technical field reports less engaging than museum exhibitions. Might say, maybe, because I do see that exhibitions resonate with contemporary audiences. B, museum exhibitions that address mummification are the most accessible. I see the, mummification, accessible themes. So that would actually work too. And D is also talking about the popularity of ancient Egypt exhibitions, which again, we see up here, they resonate with contemporary audiences. So now I've got 3 answers that I'm trying to decide between, but we don't want to try and make the answers work. We want to try and make the answers not work. So we come up with a prediction and we eliminate answers that do not match that prediction. Another quick tip is to look for contrasting words like but, right? But interpreting these field reports requires all this stuff. Consequently, and this is contrasting with exhibitions resonating with contemporary audiences. So my prediction is going to be something like harder to enjoy field reports. Now I'm going to eliminate answers that don't match that. Choice A says less engaging, harder to enjoy. That works. B, even though it was a detail that I remembered from the passage, would be out. C is the opposite of what I'm looking for, out. D is not mentioning whether or not they're harder to enjoy, out. And just like that, I get my answer. And speaking of things that we don't want to pay attention to, go ahead and ignore these stupid graphs. You're not going to need them most of the time. In this question, for example, I'm going to ignore the chart and just try to support the claim. The claim being the greatest contributors to the global increase have been countries like Canada. So what increase? I can cherry pick the passage, and the increase seems to be an increase in bald bearded men. Percentage has increased steadily, right? So we're looking for a statement that shows Canada being a great contributor to the bald bearded increase. Choice A tells us the percentage during a single year. That doesn't show an increase. Choice B tells us that it grows at the same rate as another place. That's not showing an increase. That's comparing to another place. Choice C tells us that it's lower than some other place. That doesn't work. Choice D, hopefully it's going to be our right answer. It went from 10% around this earlier date to 40% around this later date. That's literally growth. I can choose D. I don't have to look at the graphic. And that is going to be the case for a majority of these questions. That said, every once in a blue moon, you will need to look at the graphic, but you can still start the same way. If we look here and it says, according to the table, all 3 participants preferred glowstone lanterns. So I'm looking for some sort of evidence to support that they preferred glowstone lanterns. When I get into the answers, though, I realize we have reported the same level of darkness, even though they preferred darkness. There's nothing that's actually supporting that. So instead, it does seem like we have just legitimate facts from the table. So now I'm going to look at the table. Same level of darkness. That's not true. Even though Frodo and Gimli preferred same level, Frodo and Gimli did prefer the same level. C, Elrond's perception was significantly lower than Frodo's and Gimli's. That's true. But Gimli's darkness was higher than Frodo's. We can see that they were the same, so that's not true. And then between B and C, the only issue with B is it says, even though these guys preferred the same darkness rating, even though indicates that this would somehow prevent them from all preferring glowstone lanterns. So that doesn't really make sense. Choice C, though, is just basically giving us some additional information. That was true. -2 is significantly lower than 1 when this is all we have to go off of. So our answer is going to be choice C. And as long as we're ignoring stuff, let's also go ahead and ignore these notes. And I know technically this is categorized as a writing type question. I disagree with College Board on this though, because you're going to need to use reading comprehension to match the goal from the question stem to the answer choices. Right here, for example, we are going to ignore the notes and focus on the goal, which is to provide an explanation and an example of this thing, grapefruit. A, it's a collection of art instructions. That's an explanation. And then one instruction tells readers to do this thing. That's an example. Choice A seems to work. We'll keep it. B tells us an explanation but doesn't give an example. C gives an example but doesn't give an explanation. D gives more examples but not an explanation. So it is choice A. And just as with the command of evidence questions, we also have a caveat that sometimes you will have to look at the notes, but we can start by not looking at the notes. So here, describe the results of the study, right? So A showed that plankton produced light by doing this thing. That is, in fact, describing results, so we would keep it. B demonstrated that they caused damage. That would also be describing results. So we're going to keep B. C also gives us results, and all of these end up giving us results. So we know that we are going to have to look back to the notes. And at this point, it's just a matter of eliminating answers that are lying to us. And if we're clever about it, we could see that choice D is the only one that says no evidence of environmental harm. Every other answer mentions it. So if we cherry pick, the study found no harmful environmental effects. That's a pretty quick win for us. It's going to be choice D based off of that alone. You know, I'm feeling kind of lazy, so let's just keep ignoring stuff. How about we ignore most of this passage? And the trick is, anytime you're being asked about structure, you are just picking the text into its parts. So like in part 1, this happens, in part 2, this happens. And what's really cool is you can start with the first sentence as part 1 and start eliminating immediately. So Nellie Bly is widely regarded as a pioneer of investigative journalism. In my head, my prediction for part 1 is going to be part 1 introduces us to, person. And I'm being really vague because a lot of the times the answers are vague as well. And we could go on and go ahead and come up with our part 2 and our part 3 if we think there's a part 3. But if you start eliminating based off part 1, sometimes you get the right answer. So it introduces a journalist. That is what I meant by a person. Yes. It describes a series of events. No. It discusses a famous expose. No. It explains how a journalist conducted an investigation. No, it introduces the journalist first. So just like that, we got our answer, choice A. All right, remember how we're going to eliminate wrong answers? Well, sometimes you're going to end up with 2 and you're going to have to decide between them. And at this point, I want you to be a Jedi and resist joining the dark side. You know you're headed for the dark side when you start to see absolute language like always, never, forever. Don't fall for it. After all,
only a Sith deals in absolutes.
And only a student headed for the wrong answer chooses them. And definitely pause the video and try this one on your own first if you'd like, but let's look for that absolute language. Never, goodbye. Exclusively, goodbye. Solely, goodbye. And to be clear, we're not going to just go straight to the answers and do this. We are going to come up with a prediction first, but as you're eliminating answers, if you ever have a hard time deciding between 2 or 3 answers, look for that absolute language, unless there is very, very strong evidence to support that absolute language from the passage. You can get rid of it. And yeah, our answer is choice B here. And again, just to remind you, I got cheat sheets for every single rule in the SAT. Just use the link in the description of this video.